Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen by Odin to lead the young Avengers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The city of New York breathed heroes. It was in the very air, a constant, low-level hum of the impossible made real. You could see it in the gleaming spire of Stark Tower, a monument to a single man's genius that defiantly scraped the sky. You could see it in the solemn respect given to the battle-scarred facades of buildings near Grand Central, a living memorial to the incident where aliens had rained down from a hole in the sky. You could buy it on street corners, in the form of cheap plastic Captain America shields and soft, squishy Hulk fists. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a language he understood better than any other. It was a religion he practiced with the feverish devotion of a true believer. He sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, the afternoon light filtering through his window and illuminating a galaxy of dust motes dancing around him. His room was a shrine, not to one hero, but to the very concept of heroism itself. Posters of Captain America mid-shield throw, Iron Man in a repulsor-blasting pose, and a rare, grainy shot of the Black Widow in motion covered every inch of wall space. His shelves, however, were the true altar. They groaned under the weight of dozens of notebooks, each meticulously labeled, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, Volume 14, Volume 15. Volume 17 lay open before him now. On the left page was a painstakingly detailed sketch of Captain America's shield, complete with notes on its vibranium proto-adamantium alloy composition, its aerodynamic properties, and theoretical ricochet angles. On the right, he was working on something new. His pencil, a simple number 2, moved with surgical precision. Spider-Man, Bio-Cable Tensile Strength Analysis. He muttered, his voice a low, continuous stream of consciousness. Web composition is a biopolymer with properties similar to nylon, but a strength-to-weight ratio far exceeding steel. Estimated tensile strength of 120 pounds per square millimeter of cross-section, but that's just the baseline. He can alter the composition for different functions, impact webbing, webnets, simple swinging lines. So is it a conscious chemical alteration or a physical restructuring of the existing polymer? If I were him, I'd have presets. A mental command, like a biological dial. His pencil flew across the page, sketching out diagrams of the web shooters, postulating on the trigger mechanism, the cartridge size, the pressure at which the fluid was ejected. This was his quirk, his only power, an almost supernatural ability to observe, deconstruct, and understand. In a world without the genetic lottery of quirks he had read about in old-world Japanese history books, a world where power came from gamma radiation, super-soldier serums, mythical hammers, or billion-dollar suits of armor, Izuku was painfully, crushingly normal. A baseline human. A quirkless soul in a different kind of superpowered society. Izuku, honey, are you done with your homework? His mother's voice called from the kitchen. Izuku blinked, pulled from his analytical trance. He glanced at the forgotten algebra textbook on his desk. Almost, Mom! He called back, his cheeks flushing with guilt. He quickly shoved the notebook under his bed, the familiar pang of shame twisting in his gut. His mother worried. She saw his hero obsession not as a passion, but as a slow-motion heartbreak, a constant reminder of the world he desperately wanted to join but couldn't. Inko Midoriya entered his room, a plate of sliced apples in her hands. Her eyes, the same wide green as his, were soft with concern as she took in the mess of pencils and erasers on the floor. You were analyzing again, weren't you? Just finishing some notes from class? He lied, unable to meet her gaze. She sighed, a small, sad sound that did more damage to his spirit than any bully's fist. She placed the plate on his desk. Steve Rogers was on the news this morning, she said, trying to connect with him on his own terms. He was at a VA hospital. He seemed so tired. Izuku's head snapped up. He always looks tired, he said, his voice instantly regaining its analytical fervor. It's a form of hypervigilance. Post-war trauma combined with the physical toll of the serum. His metabolism burns 4,000 calories on a quiet day. Think about the energy expenditure just to exist. His cells are in a constant state of peak efficiency, which means his mind is too. He's never really off. That's why he's the greatest tactical leader alive. He's processing everything, all the time. He stopped, seeing the familiar look of loving bewilderment on his mother's face. He was doing it again. I just think he deserves to rest, she said softly. Heroes don't get to rest, Mom, Izuku replied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was his mantra, the core of his belief system, and the very thing that condemned him to a life on the sidelines. The next day at school was a master class in his own powerlessness. Midtown School of Science and Technology was for the bright, not the mighty, but even here, the shadow of the superpowered world created a pecking order. And Izuku was at the bottom. Well, if it isn't Deku, a sneering voice said, knocking a book from Izuku's hands. The nickname, a bastardization of his name that meant useless, had followed him from his early school days in Japan before they'd moved. Here, it felt even more fitting. He looked up at Eugene Flash Thompson. Flash wasn't a super genius, but he was the captain of the decathlon team, had a jawline you could cut glass on, and walked with the unearned confidence of someone who had never known a day of true adversity. In a world of gods, he was a perfect human specimen, and he never let Izuku forget he wasn't. Leave him alone, Flash, a girl's voice cut in. It was Gwen Stacy, her blonde hair and bright, intelligent eyes a beacon of decency in the crowded hallway. Flash scoffed, turning his attention to her. Just having some fun, Stacy. What's the matter? Worried some of his uselessness will rub off on you. He then looked back at Izuku, who was scrambling to pick up his book. Still scribbling in those creepy notebooks of yours? Planning how you're gonna be the next Captain America? Face it, Deku, the closest you'll ever get to a superpower is getting struck by lightning. The small crowd that had gathered laughed. Izuku's face burned. It wasn't the words themselves, but the grain of truth in them. He was nothing. A spectator. Gwen helped him up, offering a sympathetic smile, but it felt miles away. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet humiliation. In gym class, he failed to climb the rope. In history, while everyone else discussed the geopolitical impact of the Sokovia Accords, Izuku was mentally cataloging the Avengers' known roster and their likely stances, a conversation he could only have with himself. He walked home under a gray, overcast sky that matched his mood. He took the long way, a habit he'd developed to walk past the landmarks of his religion. He passed the corner where Captain America had supposedly held a car aloft to save a child during a bank robbery. He walked through the plaza where Thor had once summoned a thunderstorm to short out a rogue Stark drone. Each spot was a testament to a greatness he could never achieve. His dream of being a hero, once a bright, burning star in his chest, had begun to feel like a black hole, collapsing inward, taking all his hope with it. Maybe Flash is right, he thought, his fists clenched in his pockets. Maybe I am just a Deku. Useless. He was so lost in his self-pity that he didn't notice the screams until he was right on top of them. The scene was chaos. Pavement was cracked and splintered, a hot dog cart was overturned, and people were running, their faces masks of terror. In the center of the destruction stood a mountain of a man in a grubby orange and purple jumpsuit, wearing a metal skullcap. In his hands he swung a gray, battered crowbar that glowed with a faint, sickly light. Izuku's brain went into overdrive, overriding his fear with pure analysis. The Wrecker. Real name, Dirk Garthwaite. Ex-construction worker. Power source, the crowbar of Asgardian enchantment, imbued by Karnilla the Norn Queen. Grants superhuman strength, durability, and a psychic link to 3 other wrecking crew members. He's alone today, that's good. Reduces his tactical options. But his strength is still on par with an early-stage Hulk. A news van was parked haphazardly on the curb, its side screen flashing a breaking news banner. Avengers engaged with Doombots in Latveria. Spider-Man responding to subway derailment in Queens. No one was coming. The handful of NYPD officers at the perimeter were hopelessly outmatched, their bullets ricocheting harmlessly off the wrecker's dense muscle. "Gimme all you got!" the wrecker bellowed, laughing as he smashed his crowbar into the side of a bus, crumpling it like a tin can. "The wrecker's here for a payday!" And then Izuku saw them. A family, a mother, a father, and a little girl clutching a stuffed bear, cowering behind a half-destroyed pretzel stand. They had been cut off from the escape route. The wrecker, turning to survey his handiwork, locked eyes with them. A cruel, predatory grin spread across his face. "Ooh, looky here! Some little witnesses!" He took a heavy step toward them, raising the glowing crowbar. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was a primal, instinctual reaction that bypassed every rational part of his brain. His legs, which had felt so heavy and useless all day, were suddenly moving. The world narrowed to a tunnel. His focus zeroed in on the terrified little girl, her wide, tear-filled eyes a mirror of his own. "She's scared." That was it. That was the only thing that mattered. He shrugged off his heavy yellow backpack, the one filled with textbooks and his precious notebooks. With a desperate, choked cry, he swung it around and launched it with all his might. It was a pathetic projectile, a bag of paper and canvas against the demigod. But it was his. The backpack sailed through the air in a clumsy arc and struck the wrecker squarely in the back of the head with a dull whump. The giant man froze, more surprised than hurt. He turned, his face a mask of furious disbelief. Who the hell? He saw Izuku, a skinny teenager in a school uniform, legs pumping, charging at him with nothing but sheer, idiotic desperation. "Leave them alone!" Izuku screamed, his voice cracking with terror and adrenaline. He didn't have a plan. Create a distraction. Buy them a second. Maybe two. That was all he could think. It was the sludge villain all over again, but this time, there was no All Might waiting in the wings. There was no safety net. The wrecker's surprise melted into pure rage. "You want to be a hero, kid?" he snarled, turning his full attention to Izuku. The family, forgotten for a crucial moment, scrambled away. "Okay, let's make you a martyr." He swung the crowbar. Not to smash, but to backhand. A lazy, contemptuous swipe meant to send the annoying gnat flying. To Izuku, it was a gray, glowing wall moving at impossible speed. He saw his life, his mother's worried face, his posters, his notebooks, flash before his eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for an impact that would surely turn him into little more than a red smear on the pavement. It never came. Instead, a sound filled the air. A sound that was simultaneously the grinding of ancient glaciers, the roar of a cosmic hurricane, and the singing of a billion stars. It was a noise that vibrated in his bones and echoed in the hollows of his soul. A pillar of pure, coruscating light slammed down from the heavens, engulfing the space between Izuku and the wrecker. It was a rainbow, but a violent, untamed one, a vortex of impossible colors that didn't cast shadows but seemed to burn them away. The air filled with the smell of ozone and distant, cold nebulae. Izuku, shielded from the brunt of it, was thrown back by the sheer pressure wave. He landed hard, his head cracking against the pavement. Dazed, he pushed himself up, his ears ringing. The street had fallen utterly silent. Every civilian, every cop, even the wrecker himself, was frozen, staring at the impossible spectacle. The rainbow bridge, the Bifrost, faded, leaving behind a single figure standing in the crater it had seared into the asphalt. He was old, ancient beyond comprehension. A long, snow-white beard flowed down his chest, and a gleaming, horned helmet sat upon his brow. He wore ornate golden armor that seemed to hum with latent power, and a patch covered his right eye. In his hand, he held a long, golden spear, Gungnir. The sheer weight of his presence was immense, bending the air around him. It felt like a mountain had just materialized in the middle of the street. Odin, the All-Father of Asgard, had arrived. The wrecker stared, his jaw slack. The magic crowbar in his hand, a gift from a Norn queen, now felt like a child's toy. "And no way," he stammered. "You're—" Odin's single, piercing blue eye fell upon the wrecker. There was no anger in it. Only a vast, weary disappointment. "The enchantments of Karnilla are not meant for thugs and petty thieves," he rumbled, his voice the sound of stone grating against stone. He raised a single, gauntlet hand. "Be gone!" He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply spoke, and a wave of invisible force, of pure will, erupted from him. The wrecker was lifted from his feet as if by a giant's hand. The crowbar flew from his grasp, its glow extinguished. He slammed into the wall of a building 3 blocks away with a sickening crunch and slumped to the ground, unconscious. The crowbar clattered to the asphalt, now just a dull piece of scrap metal. The entire confrontation had taken less than 5 seconds. The silence that followed was even more profound. The police officers lowered their weapons, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Izuku just stared, his analytical mind completely short-circuited. Odin, the All-Father. King of Asgard. Father of Thor. Power source, the Odin force, a vast cosmic and mystical energy. Current status, here. Right here. Then, the All-Father turned. His single eye, ancient and impossibly wise, swept over the chaos before landing on the small, trembling form of Izuku Midoriya. He took a slow, heavy step, and then another. The ground seemed to tremble with each footfall. He walked past the discarded crowbar, past the stunned officers, and came to a stop directly in front of Izuku. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He was a being of myth and legend, a living god. Izuku felt an overwhelming urge to prostrate himself, to shrink away, to simply cease existing under that powerful gaze. "You are Izuku Midoriya," Odin stated. It was not a question. Izuku's throat was dry. He managed a tiny, squeaking nod. Odin's gaze was piercing, as if he were looking not at him, but through him, examining every decision, every hope, every failure that made up his 17 years of life. "I have watched you," the All-Father said, his voice softer now, but no less resonant. "I have seen your world through the eyes of my son. I have seen its champions, its gods of science and soldiers of fortune, men and women born to power, or who sought it out and claimed it." He gestured vaguely at the sky, where Stark Tower stood. "They are mighty. They are noble. But they are of this time. Of this moment. A war is coming, not a war for territory or riches, but a war for reality itself. A battle across the moments of history, waged by a foe who sees time as his personal tapestry." Izuku could only stare, his mind reeling. A war across time? Calm? Immortus? A temporal threat. Odin looked down at Izuku, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than regal authority crossed his face. It was a deep, profound weariness, the look of a king who had made too many hard choices. "This enemy cannot be fought with might alone. It must be fought by an idea. It requires a leader who is unexpected. An anomaly, someone whose will is not forged by power, but who forges power through their will." Odin's eye drifted to the spot where Izuku had stood his ground, the scuff marks from his sneakers still visible on the pavement. "I have seen kings born to rule who lack your spirit. I have seen gods who would have stood aside. You, a child of Midgard, with no power, no strength, no magic to call your own, you ran forward." He knelt. The king of Asgard, the All-Father of the 9 realms, knelt on the dirty asphalt of a New York street, bringing his ancient eye level with Izuku's. "The worthiness Mjolnir seeks in my son, the spirit of a noble warrior, is but a fraction of the worthiness I see in you now," Odin whispered, his voice filled with a strange, paternal warmth. "The selfless heart of a king, and the indomitable will of an Einherjar, trapped in the fragile body of a mortal boy. You did not run forward because you thought you could win, you ran forward because you knew you had to. That is a quality rarer and more valuable than all the you in Nidavellir." Tears were streaming down Izuku's face now, hot and silent. He wasn't crying from fear or relief. He was crying because for the first time in his life, someone was seeing him. Not the quirkless, useless Deku, but the hero he had always, desperately, wanted to be. "I am old, boy," Odin said, the weariness returning. "My power wanes. The Odin force must be passed on, but my sons are on their own paths. A new generation of heroes is needed to face this temporal threat, and they need a leader. A leader born not of prophecy or destiny, but of pure, selfless choice." He raised his hand, the one that had dismissed the wrecker like a fly. The golden gauntlet dematerialized into motes of light, revealing a wrinkled, scarred hand. He reached out and gently, reverently, placed it on Izuku's forehead. "I cannot give you a hammer to prove your worth. But I can give you the power to prove it to yourself." The world exploded. It was not a sensation, it was an anti-sensation. A torrent of pure, unadulterated power flooded every cell of his being. It was the heat of a billion suns and the cold of the void, all at once. He felt the birth of galaxies in his blood, the collapse of stars in his bones. Knowledge flooded his mind, the language of the Vanir, the star charts of the Kree, the fundamental equations of reality. It was too much, a tsunami of cosmic energy and information that threatened to tear his mortal consciousness apart. He screamed, a raw, agonized sound as his body began to change. He felt his bones densifying, his muscles coiling and knotting into cables of impossible strength. His scrawny frame, the source of so much shame, broadened and hardened. He grew an inch, then two, his spine straightening with newfound power. The chronic ache in his lower back from years of hunching over notebooks vanished. His eyesight, which had always been slightly blurry, sharpened to an impossible degree. He could see the individual threads on a police officer's uniform a block away. Golden energy, the very essence of the Odin force, erupted from his skin, wrapping around him like a cocoon. It was not Thor's lightning. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the power of creation, of command, of absolute will. His worn school uniform, the gray slacks, the white shirt, the red tie, disintegrated in the flare of light. The golden energy solidified, weaving itself into a new form. It was not the ornate, ceremonial armor of Odin or Thor. It was practical, tactical. Thick, dark green pants of a durable, unknown fabric. Knee-high boots of black, rune-etched leather that felt as sturdy as the earth itself. A form-fitting, sleeveless tunic of black, reinforced material covered his torso, leaving his now powerfully muscled arms bare. Over the tunic, a chest piece of dark, burnished gold formed, shaped like a stylized eagle or phoenix, its wings spreading across his chest and over his shoulders. Matching bracers snapped into place around his forearms, and a sturdy belt with a simple, circular buckle cinched at his waist. The golden light receded, leaving him kneeling in the center of the street, breathing heavily. He looked down at his hands. They were his, but they were different. Stronger. Calloused. They felt like they could punch through steel. He could feel the power humming under his skin, a boundless ocean of energy waiting for a command. Odin rose to his full height, Gungnir reappearing in his hand. He looked down at the transformed Izuku with a solemn, approving nod. This is not a gift, Izuku Midoriya. It is a burden, the Allfather declared. A portion of my power, the Odin force, now resides within you. It is tied to your will. When your resolve is absolute, you will command the power of a god. When you doubt, it will flicker and fade. I have given you the might. You must now provide the will. He tossed two objects onto the ground before Izuku. The first was a small, folded piece of thick parchment, sealed with a wax stamp of a raven. The second was a compass, made of the same dark gold as his new armor. Its needle didn't point north, it spun lazily, bathed in a soft, internal light. The names on that list are like you, Odin explained. Young. Powerful. Lost. They are the seeds of the team you must build. The compass will guide you to them. Find them. Unite them. Teach them to be heroes. Lead them. Izuku stared at the items, then back up at the God King. His mind was still a whirlwind of sensation and impossible new realities. But why me? He stammered, the question that had plagued him his whole life now taking on a cosmic scale. I'm nobody. I'm just Deku. Odin's single eye softened. There are no nobodies in the tapestry of the 9 realms, only threads that have not yet found their purpose. You were never nobody, Izuku Midoriya. You were merely waiting. Asgard has its champions. Midgard needs its own. A new kind. With that, he tapped the butt of his spear on the ground. The fate of ages does not wait for a boy to grow accustomed to his power. Go. Be the leader I know you can be. A familiar, terrifying sound began to build. The air crackled, and the vortex of rainbow light began to form around the Allfather. Wait! Izuku cried, scrambling to his feet. His new body felt strange, powerful, and utterly alien. What is this power called? What do I do? How do I? Odin's final words echoed from within the storm of light, a pronouncement that would define the rest of Izuku's life. It is the Allfather's will. And what you do with it is up to you. The Bifrost erupted, and in a blinding flash, Odin was gone. Silence descended once more, absolute and deafening. The police officers were still frozen, staring at Izuku with a new kind of fear and awe. The civilians who had started to peek out from their hiding places whispered, pointing. He was the center of everyone's attention, and for the first time, it wasn't because he was weak, but because he was terrifyingly strong. He looked down at himself. The practical, Asgardian-style costume felt both foreign and completely natural. He flexed his hand, and a faint golden aura sparked around his knuckles. The power inside him hummed, a sleeping giant. He slowly bent down and picked up the parchment and the compass. His fingers, now strong enough to crush stone, were surprisingly gentle as he broke the seal. He unrolled the list. There were 6 names, written in elegant, runic script: Kate Bishop, Elijah Bradley, William Kaplan, Theodore Altman, Cassandra Lang, America Chavez. He looked from the list to the compass. The needle flickered, then spun and locked onto a direction pointing southeast, glowing with a steady, insistent light. A million thoughts crashed through his mind. His mom. His school. His entire life, upended in the space of 10 minutes. He was wearing what looked like a superhero costume. He had actual superpowers. The God King of Asgard had just given him a divine mission. It was insane. It was impossible. It was everything he had ever dreamed of and everything he had ever feared, all at once. He stood alone in the cratered street, the weight of a god's power in his veins and a list of strangers in his hand. The setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a long shadow behind him. He looked at his hands again, then clenched them into fists. The faint golden aura flared brighter. He was no longer just a boy who wanted to be a hero. Odin had made him something more. He was terrified. He was overwhelmed. He was completely, utterly lost. But under all the fear, a tiny, defiant spark, the same one that had made him charge the wrecker, ignited. It was a spark of hope. A spark of purpose. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with a newfound clarity. He looked in the direction the compass was pointing. His first step felt like it shook the world. The Bifrost had left a wound on the world. The asphalt of the street was a swirling, glassy crater of obsidian and rainbow sheen, as if a piece of deep space had been hammered into the earth. The air, even 10 minutes later, still tasted of ozone and cold, clean nothingness. For Izuku Midoriya, the wound fell deeper, etched not onto the street but onto the very fabric of his existence. He stood in a shadowed alleyway several blocks away, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The police sirens had reached a crescendo before fading, their job made both impossible and unnecessary by a literal god. He had slipped away in the ensuing confusion, a figure of green and gold moving with an unnatural swiftness that was still terrifyingly new. He looked down at himself. The Asgardian raiment was cool and heavy against his skin, a physical manifestation of the impossible promise Odin had made. The power thrummed within him, a high-voltage current just beneath the surface. It wasn't the explosive, kinetic energy he'd imagined All Might's power felt like. This was different. It felt vast, ancient, and terrifyingly responsive to his emotional state. When he felt a surge of panic, it crackled like static electricity. When he tried to calm himself, it settled into a low, resonant hum. Okay, think. Analyze the situation. His old habits were the only anchor he had in this swirling vortex of a new reality. Situation: I have been granted immense, undefined power by the Norse god Odin. Problem 1. I have no idea how to control it. Problem 2. I have been tasked with assembling a team of unknown individuals to fight a temporal war. Problem 3. I cannot go home. What would I even tell Mom? Sorry I missed dinner. A mythological deity gave me superpowers and a new outfit, so I won't be needing my allowance anymore? He groaned, pressing the heels of his powerful new hands against his eyes. He felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. This was insane. He was a 17-year-old boy. Yesterday, his biggest problem was a pop quiz in trigonometry. He pulled out the compass. The dark gold metal was warm to the touch. The needle, a sliver of captured starlight, was pointing resolutely southeast. Beside it was the parchment with the list of names: Kate Bishop. The name meant nothing to him. A leader, Odin said to be a leader? Izuku muttered, pacing the length of the alley. But how do you lead when you don't even know how to walk? He had to try. He had to know what he was capable of. He looked up past the grimy brick walls of the alley, to the rooftops silhouetted against the bruised purple of the evening sky. Getting up there seemed like a good first step. It was away from the prying eyes of the street. He crouched, channeling the memory of heroes he'd seen leap incredible distances. Focus. Feel the power. Not in your arms, but in your legs. Like a compressed spring. He poured his intent into the action, a silent, desperate plea to the universe. And then he jumped. He didn't soar. He exploded. The ground beneath his feet cracked as he launched himself upward with the force of a cannonball. The world became a vertical smear of brick and fire escapes. He shot past the rooftop he was aiming for, and the one above that, and the one above that. For a terrifying second, he was suspended in the air, high above the city, the wind whipping at his face with a piercing shriek. He saw the entirety of Manhattan laid out beneath him like a glowing circuit board, a sight so beautiful and vast it stole his breath. Then gravity, with a triumphant sneer, reasserted its claim. He plummeted, pinwheeling his arms in a panic. Ayaha! He crashed onto a rooftop with the impact of a small meteor, landing in a heap of tangled limbs. The tarred surface of the roof cratered beneath him, but his body, miraculously, was unharmed. He lay there, groaning, every muscle screaming in protest not from injury, but from sheer, unprecedented strain. Okay, note to self. He wheezed, pushing himself up. Less everything. He stood shakily, looking out over the city. The initial terror was slowly being replaced by a dawning sense of awe. This power, it was immense. Frightening, yes, but magnificent. He felt the need to test it again, but with more control. His gaze fell upon a graffiti-covered water tower on an adjacent building, a hulking metal drum common to the older parts of the city. A controlled test, he thought, planting his feet. Not a jump. A punch. All Might always called out his attacks. It gives the action focus. A name. A purpose. He thought back to Odin's words. Asgardian power, and All Might's smashes were named for American states. He was in New York. He drew his arm back, the golden energy coiling around his fist. The air crackled. He channeled a sliver of the power he'd used for the jump, maybe 1%? 0.5%? He had no frame of reference. New York. Smash! He yelled, punching the empty air in the direction of the water tower. It wasn't just a punch. The force didn't just travel from his fist. The air itself seemed to warp, compressing in front of his knuckles before exploding outward in a concussive wave of pure kinetic energy. The shockwave, visible for a split second as a ripple in space, crossed the 50-foot gap in an instant. It didn't dent the water tower. It didn't knock it over. It vaporized it. One moment, a 10,000-gallon metal tank. The next, a cloud of atomized mist and shrapnel that rained down on the street below. Izuku stared, his arms still outstretched, his jaw hanging open. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant, surprise car alarm his sonic boom had set off. He had aimed to tap the power, and had instead uncorked a hurricane. Oh no! He whispered, his face draining of color. I'm a menace! I'm a villain! He stumbled back, his new confidence shattered. This power wasn't a tool. It was a weapon of mass destruction, and he was a child holding the trigger. He looked at his hands in horror. Odin hadn't just given him the might of a god. He'd given him the capacity to wreck the world. He clutched the compass, its gentle glow a stark contrast to his spiraling panic. Find them. Lead them. The command was a lifeline. He couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. He had a mission. He just had to survive getting there. Summoning his courage, he focused on the compass. Southeast. He crouched again, this time pouring only the faintest whisper of his will into his legs. Gentle. Easy. A hop. Not a launch. He leaped. This time, he only overshot his target building by half a block, landing with a jarring but manageable thud in another alley. Progress, he thought grimly, before taking off again. The compass led him to a place that felt more alien to him than Asgard itself. The gleaming, glass and steel facade of the Bishop Athletic Club, an exclusive establishment on the Upper East Side. The kind of place where membership cost more than his mother's annual salary. Through the tinted windows, he could see pristinely dressed people on elliptical machines, watching stock tickers on personal screens. The compass needle, however, pointed insistently downward, toward a sublevel. Izuku circled the building until he found a graded service entrance. With a gentle, almost timid push, he popped the heavy lock and slipped inside, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the concrete stairs. He followed the hum of voices and a rhythmic thwack sound. He emerged in a viewing gallery overlooking a vast, brilliantly lit indoor archery range. Polished wooden floors, digital scoring screens, and a hushed, reverent atmosphere bespoke a serious, high-stakes competition. Down on the range, a handful of archers were in the final round of what the main screen declared the Bishop Invitational Under-20 Championship. All eyes, however, were on one competitor. She was tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She moved with an easy, almost lazy grace that couldn't hide the coiled tension of a predator in her posture. As she drew her bow, a sleek, purple recurve, her focus was absolute. The world seemed to narrow to her, the arrow, and the distant target. The announcer's voice echoed through the gallery. And now Kate Bishop on her final shot. She needs a perfect bullseye to tie the range record set by her own mentor, Clint Barton. Kate Bishop, Izuku's mind supplied, his breath catching. It was her. Kate's eyes were narrowed in concentration. She took a breath, held it, and released. The arrow was a purple streak, a flicker of motion too fast to properly track. It struck the target 70 meters away with a deeply satisfying thwack. A split second later, the digital screen above the target flashed, 10x. A perfect center shot. The small, polite crowd erupted in applause. Kate allowed herself a small, confident smirk, lowering her bow. She was the very picture of competence and control. Everything Izuku was not, and that's when the doors to the range burst open. "Nobody move!" A voice grated over a cheap loudspeaker. "This is a robbery!" 3 figures stomped in, clad in mismatched gear that looked like it had been cobbled together in a junkyard. One had a bulky gauntlet that sparked with erratic red energy. Another held a humming plasma cutter. The leader brandished a device that looked like a modified leaf blower with a glowing blue power cell strapped to it. Izuku's brain cataloged them instantly. Low-level tech thieves. Scavengers. Probably working for the Tinkerer. Their gear is unstable. Dangerous, but prone to failure. "We're here for the prize money and whatever shiny watches you rich folks are wearing," the leader yelled, waving his leaf blower around. "So let's make this easy." Panic erupted. The archers and spectators scrambled back. Down on the floor, Kate Bishop did in panic. She calmly nocked another arrow, her eyes narrowing, assessing the threat with the same focus she'd given the target. Up in the gallery, Izuku knew he had to act. This was his mission. He was supposed to recruit her, not watch her get robbed. He looked around for an entrance, but the thieves were blocking the main doors. That left, above, he looked up at the reinforced glass of the gallery window. He remembered the water tower. Controlled. Gentle. Just enough to get through. He took a running start. "Here goes nothing," he muttered and leaped. He did not gently pass through the window. He exploded through it in a shower of pulverized safety glass and twisted metal framing, landing on the polished floor of the range with a deafening crack that splintered the wood beneath his boots. He stood up, trying for a heroic pose, but ended up just looking bewildered in the center of the destruction he'd caused. The thieves, Kate, and everyone else stared at him, stunned into silence. This was his moment. His heroic debut. He had to say something cool. Something Captain America would say. His brain, however, supplied only panicked adrenaline. "New York smash!" he screamed, throwing a punch at the nearest thief. He had, once again, forgotten to moderate his strength. The concussive blast of air missed the thief by a good 10 feet, but slammed into the wall of targets behind him. The entire apparatus, targets, stands, electronic scoring systems, was ripped from its moorings and blasted into a tangled heap of scrap metal and wires against the far wall. The thief with the plasma cutter just stared. "What the?" Izuku froze, looking at the devastation, then back at his fist, then at the stunned faces around him. "Oh, I am so sorry," he squeaked, his voice a complete betrayal of his powerful entrance. That was way too much. My bad. I'm new," a sharp, feminine voice cut through the chaos. "Hey! Weird green and gold guy. Less talking, more punching the actual bad guys." It was Kate Bishop. She had already moved, taking cover behind a rack of bows. Her earlier shock had been replaced by a look of profound annoyance mixed with tactical appraisal. Spurred by her words, Izuku shook off his embarrassment. "Right. Mission." The leader of the goons recovered first, aiming his strange weapon at Izuku. "I don't know who you are, but you just wrecked my payday." He pulled the trigger. A vortex of pressurized air, strong enough to knock a man off his feet, shot towards Izuku. Izuku simply braced himself. The gale hit him and did absolutely nothing, his green tunic barely even fluttering. He just stood there, rooted to the floor. The thief's eyes went wide. Kate used the distraction. Thwack! An arrow with a thick, weighted head flew from her bow, wrapping a wire around the vortex gun and yanking it from the thief's grasp. Thwack! A second arrow, this one with a small canister, hit the ground at the feet of the gauntlet-wearing goon, releasing a thick, incredibly sticky foam that glued him to the floor. "Hey!" the thief yelled, struggling in the goo. Izuku, inspired by her efficiency, charged the last thief, the one with the plasma cutter. This time, he didn't use a smash. He just ran, closing the distance in a single bound. The thief swung the cutter wildly. Izuku ducked under the sizzling beam and, with 2 fingers, flicked the man's forehead. The goon's eyes rolled back into his head and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. It was over in 30 seconds. The room was silent again, save for the crackling of damaged electronics and the groaning of the man stuck in the foam. Izuku stood over the unconscious thief, breathing heavily. He turned to face Kate, a sheepish, apologetic smile plastered on his face. "Hi. Sorry about the mess. And the targets. And the wall. I'll pay for it. I think." Kate Bishop walked towards him, stepping carefully around the debris. She circled him once, her sharp eyes taking in his strange costume, his supernaturally fit physique, and the crater he'd made in her floor. "Okay," she said, crossing her arms. "I have several questions. Number 1, who are you? Number 2, what was that? And number 3, are you like Thor's little brother or something? The new intern from Asgard? Let me guess, you're Green Thor." "I'm not Green Thor," Izuku said, his face flushing. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. And it's complicated." He held out the compass. The needle pulsed with a soft light, aimed directly at her. "I was sent to find you. By Odin." Kate stared at the compass, then back at his earnest, pleading face. She'd heard a lot of crazy things since Clint Barton had dropped into her life. She'd fought mobsters and ninjas, but sent by Odin was a new one. Still, the impossible object in his hand and the sheer, casual power he just displayed were compelling evidence. And there was something about him, a frantic sincerity that was impossible to fake. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "You are definitely paying for the damages. And you have a lot of explaining to do." She glanced at the name on her family's athletic club. "But we can't talk here. My mom is going to have a fit." She nodded toward the exit. "Come on, Green Thor. Let's go." Izuku blinked. "My name is Izuku." "Sure it is," Kate said, already walking away. "Grab your weird magic compass and let's blow this popsicle stand before the cops ask questions I don't want to answer." Izuku scrambled to follow her, a feeling of dizzying success warring with profound social anxiety. 1 down. 5 to go. An hour later, they were on a rooftop in the East Village, the night air cool against Izuku's bare arms. Kate sat on a ledge, cleaning her arrows, while Izuku paced, giving her the full, rambling story. He told her about being normal, about the Wrecker, the Bifrost, Odin, the Odin Force, the Temporal War, and the list. When he was done, he stood there awkwardly, waiting for her judgment. Kate was silent for a long moment, sighting down the shaft of an arrow. "So let me get this straight," she said finally. The king of the space Vikings looked at the entirety of Earth, with all its super soldiers and geniuses and mutants, and he picked you, a nerdy, powerless kid who gets flustered and apologizes after punching a wall down, to lead a new team of Avengers against a time-traveling warlord? Yes? That's a pretty good summary, actually, Izuku said, wincing. Kate shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. That is the most ridiculous, insane, and frankly stupidest thing I have ever heard. She looked up at him, her gaze sharp. And I 100% believe you. Izuku's jaw dropped. You do? Kid, I saw you punch the air and break a wall. And that compass is humming like a hornet's nest every time it points at me, she said, gesturing with the arrow. The world stopped making sense a long time ago. This is just the next weird chapter. She stood up, sliding the arrow back into her quiver. So, who's next on your magical mystery tour? Izuku fumbled with the parchment. 2 names. William Kaplan and Theodore Altman. The compass says they're nearby. Kaplan and Altman, Kate mused. Don't know them. All right, leader. She gave him a pointed look. Lead on. The compass led them through the labyrinthine streets of the village to a quiet, residential block lined with brownstones. The needle pulsed faster and faster until it was pointing directly at a specific apartment building, its light focused on a third-floor window. From the outside, everything seemed normal, but Izuku could feel it. A subtle pressure in the air. A faint, cloying scent of burnt sugar and static. Something was wrong. Stay here, he told Kate. I'll check it out. Not a chance. She shot back, already knocking an arrow. We're a team, remember? A weird 2-person team with a terrible name. I'm not letting you run in and New York smash a civilian's apartment. Izuku couldn't argue with her logic. He gave a sharp nod and pointed to the fire escape. Okay. Up there, they ascended the rusty ladder as quietly as they could. As they neared the third-floor window, the pressure in the air intensified. They could hear voices from within. 2 young men, their tones hushed and frantic. Can't get a lock on it, Teddy, it's too unstable, one voice said, laced with panic. Just keep trying, Billy. I can keep it contained, but not forever. The second voice replied, strained. Izuku and Kate peered through the grime-covered glass. The apartment was a mess. Furniture was overturned, and books were scattered everywhere. In the center of the living room, 2 teenagers stood back to back. One, with dark, shaggy hair, had his hands outstretched, his fingers glowing with faint blue light. The other was huge, taller than the doorframe, with green skin, pointed ears, and rippling muscles. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and his powerful arms were wrapped around a shimmering, almost invisible bubble of distortion in the middle of the room. Inside the bubble, dozens of small, insect-like creatures made of pure, flickering light darted about. They looked like fireflies made of broken glass, and they buzzed with a sound that hurt to hear. Magical disturbance, Izuku's brain supplied. The boy, Billy, is a magic user. A reality warper, maybe? The other, Teddy, is a shapeshifter. Kree/Skrull hybrid? His physiology is off the charts. They're trying to contain something. It's not working, Billy gasped, sweat beading on his forehead. Every time I try a binding spell, they just phase through it, Teddy grunted with effort. They're getting stronger. I think they're feeding on the lights. As if on cue, one of the creatures phased through Teddy's containment field. It zipped toward a floor lamp and plunged into the bulb. The light flickered violently and then died, and the creature emerged, now twice its original size and glowing brighter. Kate looked at Izuku, her eyes wide. What's the plan, boss? She whispered. Izuku's first instinct screamed at him, smash it. But his analytical mind, recalling the water tower, took over. Brute force would be useless. It would be like trying to punch smoke. Worse, if these things fed on energy, a smash might just be a feast for them. He had to stop thinking like a hammer. He pressed his face closer to the glass, his eyes scanning, deconstructing. They're called glimmerphages. A piece of Odin's bestowed knowledge surfaced in his mind. Minor dimensional parasites. They feed on ambient energy, particularly the visible light spectrum. They are non-corporeal except for the exact moment they feed. The exact moment they feed. An idea clicked into place. It wasn't a 20-step plan from his notebooks. It was simple, direct, and relied on everyone. A real plan. He turned to Kate. I'm going in. On my signal, I need you to shoot a flashbang arrow at the far corner of the room. As far from them as possible. Kate raised an eyebrow. A flashbang? Won't that just feed them? It'll draw them all to a single point. Izuku explained, his voice low and confident. When they all converge to feed, they'll become solid for a split second. That's the opening. He looked back through the window at the struggling magic user. And that's when Billy casts his spell. Without waiting for another question, he moved to the window. He didn't punch it. He placed his fingers on the lock and, with a gentle application of pressure, twisted the metal until it snapped. He slid the window open silently. Hey! He called out, his voice making both boys jump. Billy and Teddy spun around, their eyes wide with alarm. Who are you? Billy shouted. A friend. I can help, Izuku said, climbing into the room, Kate right behind him. Your containment is failing. I have a plan. Teddy looked from the hulking, green-skinned boy to Izuku's earnest face. He was desperate. Okay. What is it? You, Izuku said, pointing to Billy. What's your strongest binding spell? A katana sphinctus spell, Billy said, startled by the direct question. It creates chains of mystic force, but it needs a solid target. Perfect, Izuku said. He looked at Kate and nodded. Now, Kate was already in position. She drew and fired in one fluid motion. The flashbang arrow soared across the room and embedded itself in the wall. A second later, it detonated with a blinding, silent flash of white light. Just as Izuku predicted, the glimmerphages went into a frenzy. They abandoned their attack on Teddy's field and swarmed toward the fading afterglow of the arrow, converging into a single, dense cluster of ravenous light. For one critical instant, they all became solid, their forms coalescing as they tried to devour the potent energy. Billy, now! Izuku roared. Billy's hands flew up, his eyes glowing with blue power. Astrum! Vinctus! Incatanus! He chanted. 6 chains of shimmering blue energy erupted from his hands and shot across the room. They found their purchase on the now corporeal mass of glimmerphages, wrapping around the cluster and pulling tight. The creatures shrieked, a sound like scraping metal, trapped and solidified. But the spell wasn't a banishment, it was a cage. The chains were pulling the creatures, now a single writhing mass, toward Billy. I've got them, but I can't send them back, he grunted, straining. They're too heavy, Teddy! Izuku commanded, pointing at the mystic chains. Anchor him! Teddy didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, his large green hands grabbing the glowing chains of light. He dug his heels into the floor, his muscles bulging as he took the strain, acting as a living anchor for Billy's spell. The two of them, working together, held the shrieking mass of creatures immobile in the center of the room. It's not enough! Teddy strained. We can't hold them forever! Izuku knew what he had to do. This needed one final push. A different kind of force. Not kinetic, but pure will. He walked forward, placing his hands on Billy's and Teddy's shoulders. He closed his eyes and reached for the ocean of power inside him. He didn't try to punch or smash. He focused on Odin's words. The Allfather's will. He pushed. Golden energy, pure and clean, flowed from him, down his arms, and into the two boys. It wasn't violent. It felt like support. Like reinforcement. The blue chains of Billy's spell flared, becoming shot through with threads of brilliant gold. Teddy felt a surge of strength, his footing becoming as solid as a mountain's root. Together, the three of them pushed back. With a final, deafening shriek, the glimmerphage cluster imploded, folding in on itself until it vanished, ripped back to whatever dimension it had crawled from. The apartment fell silent. The golden glow faded from Izuku's hands. Billy and Teddy collapsed, panting. Billy stared at his own hands, then at Izuku. What did you do? I felt everything. Teddy reverted to his normal human form, a blonde, friendly-looking teenager, and stared at Izuku with undisguised awe. You supercharged us. Who are you? Izuku took a deep breath, the adrenaline starting to fade. He looked at the two boys, then at Kate, who was leaning against the wall with a small, impressed smirk on her face. This time, the explanation came easier. He presented the compass, told the story, and laid out the mission. When he finished, Billy, the magic user, was the first to speak. Odin, he breathed, his eyes wide. So the myths are true. All of them. He looked at Teddy, his expression a mix of terror and excitement. A temporal war. Teddy, this is bigger than anything we've ever faced. Teddy put a protective arm around Billy's shoulders. He looked at Izuku, his gaze steady. You knew what to do. You saw the pattern. You led us. He glanced at Kate, who gave a slight nod. If you're fighting to save time itself, and Odin himself thinks you're the guy to lead the charge, well. He looked at Billy, a silent question passing between them. Billy gave a firm nod. Teddy turned back to Izuku. What you said about a team, about needing us, we're in. Izuku's heart swelled with a feeling so intense it almost brought him to his knees. Relief. Hope. He wasn't alone in this. He had a strategist. He had a sorcerer. He had a shape-shifting powerhouse. He had a team. Or, the beginning of one. Okay, Kate said, pushing off the wall and clapping her hands together. That's 3 recruits. And 1 apartment that needs a serious cleaning. So, who's next on the Allfather's magical scavenger hunt? Izuku looked down at the list, a real, genuine smile finally reaching his face. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but for the first time since that pillar of rainbow light had torn his life apart, he felt like he might actually be able to do this. He was still clumsy. He was still scared. But he was a leader. And his assembly was just beginning. The energy of their first successful mission carried them through the next morning. They had commandeered Kate's father's mostly unused penthouse apartment, a sterile, minimalist space with panoramic views of the city, as a temporary base of operations. It was a strange sight, a Kree-Skrull prince and a reality-warping sorcerer making toast in a kitchen that cost more than a car, while a master archer cleaned her equipment on a $1,000 glass coffee table. And in the center of it all was Izuku Midoriya, pacing. Okay, so recap, he said, his muttering having returned with a vengeance. The team was getting used to it. We have range precision with Kate. High-level esoteric arts with Billy. Metamorphic powerhouse capabilities with Teddy. My role is high-impact vanguard. Close quarters force multiplier? You're the sledgehammer, Deku, Kate said without looking up from refletching an arrow. She had decided to stick with the nickname, claiming Izuku was too many syllables to yell in a crisis. You hit things hard. Just try to aim at the bad things this time. Billy, sitting beside Teddy on a white leather sofa, looked up from a book of arcane symbols he'd produced from thin air. The way you channeled your energy into us was more than just force. It was foundational. Like you were reinforcing our own abilities from the ground up. Izuku stopped pacing, a thoughtful look on his face. The Odin Force. Odin called it the Allfather's will. Maybe it's not just about hitting things. Maybe it's about empowering others' will to act? He shook his head, running a hand through his perpetually messy green hair. This is all too theoretical. We need more data, or we need to find the next person on your magic list, Teddy suggested, gesturing with a piece of toast. Izuku's posture straightened. Mission focus. He pulled out the compass. The golden needle spun for a moment before locking into place, pointing west, toward Brooklyn. He then unfurled the parchment, his eyes scanning the elegant script. Elijah Bradley, he read aloud. Kate's head snapped up, her hands freezing their work. Bradley? As in Isaiah Bradley? Izuku blinked. The name was vaguely familiar, pulled from the depths of the historical knowledge Odin had poured into his head. The first black Captain America? The one from the 1950s? The government tried to erase him from history. He's a legend. A ghost story, Kate said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. Clint told me about him. Said he was every bit the hero Steve Rogers was, but he got a prison cell instead of a parade. She looked at the compass, then back at Izuku. If this kid is his grandson, this might not be as simple as fighting dimensional bugs. Her words proved to be prophetic. The compass led them not to a lab or a training ground, but to a quiet, tree-lined street in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. It was a world away from the cold luxury of the penthouse. Kids were playing stickball in the street, music drifted from open windows, and the air smelled of grilled food from a nearby community barbecue. The needle pointed directly at a well-maintained community center, its brick facade covered in a vibrant mural depicting historical black leaders. They stood across the street, an odd, conspicuous gaggle. Kate was in her purple civilian gear, Billy and Teddy in casual street clothes, and Izuku, feeling more out of place than ever, in his green and gold Asgardian tunic. "Right, I look ridiculous," Izuku mumbled. "Should I have asked Odin for a casual Friday variant? Is that a thing? Just try to act natural," Kate advised. "Like you're a lost cosplayer who happens to have the power of a minor deity." They crossed the street and entered the center. The compass led them past a group of seniors playing chess and a room where a dance class was in full swing, finally stopping at the doors to a gymnasium. Inside, the rhythmic squeak of sneakers and the steady thump-thump-thump of a basketball echoed. There was only one person on the court. He was young, about their age, with a sharp, intelligent face and an athletic build. He moved with a focused intensity, dribbling the ball with practiced ease, his eyes fixed on the hoop. He drove to the basket, leaped, and laid the ball in with a fluid motion. He turned to grab his ball, and for a moment he froze. He saw the four of them standing in the doorway, a bizarre collection of strangers. His eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over them, lingering for a moment on Izuku's impossible costume. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a guarded, almost hostile tension. Izuku felt his stomach tighten. He stepped forward, trying to project an aura of friendly sincerity. "Hi! Are you Elijah Bradley?" The young man picked up his basketball, tucking it under his arm. "Who's asking?" he said, his voice cool and clipped. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. These are my friends," Izuku said, gesturing to the others. We're putting a team together. And we were told you could help." Eli's eyes narrowed. He looked at Izuku, at the raw power that was practically radiating off him, at the strange, otherworldly costume. He saw a uniform. He saw another system, another flag to be saluted, and his face hardened into a mask of pure rejection. "A team of what? Heroes?" he scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. "I'm not interested." Izuku was taken aback. "But we're fighting to protect people." "There's a threat. There's always a threat." Eli cut him off, his voice sharp as broken glass. "And there's always someone in a costume promising to save the day. I know how that story goes. You wear the colors, you fight the battles, and when you're broken and used up, the people you fought for forget your name. Or worse, they lock you away so they don't have to look at what they did to you." His gaze was searing, filled with a deep, ancestral pain. He was talking about his grandfather. "My grandfather wore a costume," Eli continued, his voice low and intense. "He carried a shield. He believed in the dream, and for that, he got 30 years in a solitary cell, his mind and body broken, while another man with blonde hair and blue eyes got a museum. So you can take your team, and your costume, and your righteous mission, and you can get the hell out of my neighborhood." He turned his back on them, a clear and final dismissal. Izuku stood there stunned. All his sincerity, all his earnestness, had just slammed into a wall of lived history. He had no counter-argument. Eli wasn't wrong. "Eli, please." He tried again, his voice softer. "Odin himself chose." Eli spun back around, his face a mask of fury. "Odin? A king from a golden palace in the sky? What does he know about what happens down here on the ground? You walk in here glowing like a Christmas tree, talking about gods and destiny. You're not a hero. You're just another person who thinks power gives them the right to tell people what to do." He pointed a shaking finger at Izuku. "That star-spangled costume, or whatever gold-plated version you're wearing, isn't a symbol of hope. It's a cage. I want nothing to do with it." With that, he walked off the court and disappeared through a door marked locker room. The gym was silent save for the faint echo of the bouncing ball. Izuku felt like he'd been punched in the gut. His leadership had failed its first real test of ideology. Kate put a hand on his shoulder. "He's not wrong, Deku," she said quietly. "About his grandfather. About how the world works, I know, Izuku whispered, his shoulders slumping. But the threat is real. Khan, he won't care about history or injustice. He'll just erase it all. Then we have to find a way to show him, Teddy said, his expression grim. Words aren't going to be enough. They were about to leave, defeated, when the world outside the gymnasium doors dissolved into chaos. A scream cut through the air, followed by a sound like tearing metal. The lights in the gym flickered and died, plunging them into semi-darkness, the only illumination coming from the high windows. Then came the new sound. A high-pitched, electronic whine that seemed to drill directly into their skulls. Izuku and his team rushed out into the main hall of the community center. People were screaming and running, trying to get away from the entrance, where a section of the brick wall had been vaporized. Standing in the newly made doorway were three figures. They were robotic, but sleek and futuristic, their silver and purple chassis seeming to shift and blur at the edges, as if they weren't entirely in sync with the present moment. Their heads were smooth, featureless domes, save for a single, glowing red optic that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. They were not the cobbled-together junk of street-level thugs. These were killing machines, purpose-built and lethally efficient. Chrono Sentinels, the Odin knowledge whispered in Izuku's mind. Kang's elite hunters. Their temporal phase armor makes them resistant to physical damage. They are programmed to adapt and neutralize specific parahuman abilities. Before Izuku could even shout a warning, one of the Nultrox, as the common parlance named them, raised its arm. A strange antenna extended, emitting a low-frequency hum. Billy, who had already begun chanting, his hands glowing with blue energy, suddenly cried out in pain. Arg! I can't focus! The magic, it's just static! The blue glow around his hands fizzled and died like a cheap light bulb. Simultaneously, a second Nultrox targeted Teddy, who had begun to shift, his skin turning green and his muscles expanding. It fired a beam of distorted, shimmering energy. The beam struck Teddy mid-transformation. He roared in agony, collapsing to his knees as his body flickered violently between his human and hulkling forms, unable to hold either. Billy! Teddy! Kate yelled, drawing an arrow. They had been neutralized in under 5 seconds. Kong was adapting. He knew who was on the team, and he'd sent a direct counter. Kate, get the civilians out! Izuku roared, his shock giving way to pure, protective fury. He launched himself forward, a green and gold blur of motion. I'll handle these things! He slammed into the first Nultrox with a shoulder tackle that should have sent it through the opposite wall. Instead, it was like hitting a rubberized mountain. The robot skidded back a few feet, its phase armor absorbing most of the kinetic energy. Its red optic swiveled to focus on him. Threat detected. Asgardian energy signature. Anomaly designation Deku. Primary target. The words weren't spoken. They were a cold, synthetic broadcast directly into Izuku's mind. The robot's hand morphed into a high-frequency blade that vibrated with a deadly hum. It lunged, its movements impossibly fast and precise. Izuku, relying on his new instincts, dodged and weaved, the blade slashing through the air where he'd been a millisecond before. From across the room, Kate was a whirlwind of motion, herding terrified civilians toward a back exit while firing a steady stream of arrows. An explosive arrow detonated on a Nultrox's chest, staggering it, but doing no lasting damage. A smoke pellet arrow provided cover. She was brilliant, tactical, but she was buying seconds, not winning a fight. Eli Bradley emerged from the locker room, drawn by the commotion. He froze, taking in the impossible scene, the terrified people, his struggling new friends, the futuristic deathbots, and the green-garbed boy fighting with the power of a god. He watched as Kate, her back turned as she helped a fallen old man, was targeted by the third Nultrox. Its arm transformed into a plasma cannon, the barrel glowing with deadly heat. Kate, look out! Izuku yelled, but he was locked in combat with the other two, parrying blows that would pulverize concrete. He couldn't get there in time. And then, something large and pink and very, very fast slammed into the side of the community center from the outside. The wall exploded inward in a shower of brick and plaster. A giant, sneaker-clad foot, the size of a small car, stomped down right next to the plasma-wielding Nultrox, shaking the entire building. A girl's voice, cheerful and slightly out of breath, boomed from 20 feet up. Woo! Nailed the landing! Did someone call for backup? Looming over the building was a girl with reddish blonde hair in a black and red costume, now grown to the size of a 2-story house. She had a wide, enthusiastic grin on her face, but her eyes were wide with a hint of "oh crap, what did I just get myself into?" Cassie Lang, daughter of Ant-Man, had arrived. Her dramatic entrance was, however, not entirely helpful. The Nulltrox she had targeted simply swiveled its plasma cannon upward and fired a shot that clipped her in the shin. "YEOWCH!" she yelped, stumbling back and tripping over the roof of a parked van, crushing it flat. Her inexperience made her a massive, clumsy target. It was this moment that broke Eli Bradley. He saw it all laid bare. He saw the chaos, the indiscriminate violence of the enemy. He saw the big, clumsy girl who had tried to help and was now in danger. And most of all, he saw Izuku, the green-clad boy. Seeing Cassie was the new primary target, did something Eli's cynical heart could not comprehend. He disengaged from his own fight, placing himself directly between the charging Nulltrox and the fallen Cassie, his arms spread wide. He was creating a wall with his own body to protect a complete stranger. It was reckless. It was suicidal. It was undeniably heroic. In that instant, Eli didn't see a costume or a system. He saw the pure, unvarnished ideal his grandfather had fought for. The willingness to stand up, to shield others, no matter the cost. His grandfather had been betrayed by the country, but not by the ideal. And that ideal was alive, screaming with defiance, in the middle of his community center. The war had come to his doorstep. He could no longer pretend it wasn't his fight. A fire ignited in his soul. He sprinted back into the locker room, his mind made up. He threw open his personal locker. Inside, beneath his gym clothes, was a false bottom. He ripped it open. There, nestled in worn fabric, was his inheritance. His burden. His destiny. A costume, patterned after Captain America's but in stark black, red, and white. And a shield. Not the pristine, gleaming disc from the Smithsonian, but an older, triangular heater shield, its paint chipped and scarred from battles history had refused to record. His grandfather's shield. Beside it lay a single, sealed hypospray needle containing a shimmering, blue liquid. A refined, stabilized version of the serum. A single dose. A point of no return. His hands didn't shake. With grim determination, he stripped off his civvies and suited up. The fabric of the costume felt like a second skin. He picked up the shield, its weight familiar, practiced. Finally, he took the hypospray. He looked at it for a second, then without hesitation, he jammed it into his thigh and pressed the plunger. A jolt of cold fire shot through his veins, a feeling like waking up for the first time. His senses sharpened. The sounds of the battle outside became clearer, the scent of ozone and burning plaster more acute. His muscles coiled with a newfound, effortless strength. He was no longer just Eli Bradley, he was Patriot. He burst out of the community center, a striking figure in black and red. He saw a Nulltrox bearing down on Kate, its vibroblade raised for a killing blow. With a practiced, powerful motion he had rehearsed 1,000 times in secret, Eli threw his shield. The triangular shield spun through the air, a blur of red, white, and black. It struck the Nulltrox in the back of its head with a deafening clang. The robot staggered, its targeting system disrupted. The shield ricocheted off its chassis, off a wall, and then flew straight back into Patriot's waiting hand with a satisfying thump. Everyone froze. Kate stared, her jaw dropping. Izuku, who was currently holding a Nulltrox's fist at bay, saw the new arrival and his eyes went wide with shock and dawning hope. "Get the civilians clear!" Patriot barked at Kate, his voice now carrying an undeniable weight of command. "Midoriya! Your power is overwhelming, stop trying to wrestle them. Use concussive force. Giant girl, we need a distraction, not a casualty. Can you get bigger?" It was a cascade of perfect, tactical commands. Cassie, still on the ground, blinked. "Bigger? I think so." She focused, and with a groan of effort, she began to grow again, from 20 feet to 30, then 40. "Good!" Patriot yelled. Now make some noise! Cassie grinned and slammed her giant fist into the street, missing the robots but creating a massive tremor and a shower of asphalt that drew all three of their attentions. Kate, their optics! The red lights are their primary sensor hubs. Go for the eyes! Patriot commanded. Kate didn't need to be told twice. With the robots distracted by the colossal, fist-pounding girl, she had clear shots. Thwip. 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 3 perfectly aimed arrows, tipped with hardened steel, shot across the street. Each one found its mark, shattering the red optical sensors of the Unauthorized. The robots reeled back, blinded, waving their weapon arms uselessly. Deku, now! Patriot bellowed. Hit them with everything you've got! Izuku's face split into a fierce grin. He understood. This was leadership. This was synergy. He poured the Odin force into his fists, the golden energy flaring to life. Manhattan smash! He roared, punching the air in front of the first blinded robot. The concussive blast, now properly aimed and unleashed with full force, struck the Unauthorized center mass. Its phase armor flickered and failed under the overwhelming onslaught, and the robot was blown apart into 1,000 pieces of future tech confetti. He spun, targeting the second. Detroit smash! Another blast of force, another robot vaporized. The last Unauthorized, sensing its imminent demise, tried to activate a temporal self-destruct. But Patriot was already there. He leaped forward with his newfound super soldier speed, brought his shield down like a guillotine, and cleaved the robot's head from its shoulders. It crumpled to the ground, inert. The battle was over. Silence fell, broken only by Cassie shrinking back down to normal size with a dizzying whoosh. She stood there, looking wobbly but ecstatic. Did we win? I think we won. That was awesome! The 5 of them stood in the wreckage-strewn street. The ruined community center, the crushed van, the craters in the asphalt. It was a mess. It was chaos. But they were all standing. Billy and Teddy, the dampening fields gone, stumbled out of the center, looking shaken but okay. Eli, Patriot, stood breathing heavily, the shield held firmly at his side. He looked at Izuku, his earlier hostility gone, replaced by a grudging respect. You were right, Patriot said, his voice quiet. The fight is here. I can't stand on the sidelines anymore. He looked at his grandfather's shield. But I do this on my own terms. For the people here, not for any government, and not for any king in the sky. Izuku nodded, understanding completely. That's all anyone can ask. He looked at Cassie, who was practically vibrating with excitement. And you are Cassie Lang, she said, beaming. My dad is Ant-Man. I've been, training. Secretly. I saw the fight on the Hero Tracker app and I came as fast as I could. Am I on the team? Please say I'm on the team. Izuku looked around at the incredible, impossible group of people assembled before him. Kate, the grounded archer, her expression a mixture of exasperation and grudging admiration. Billy and Teddy, the mage and the prince, standing together, stronger than ever. Cassie, the enthusiastic giant girl, full of heart and desperate to help. And Eli, the legacy, a born leader who had just embraced his destiny. They were a collection of misfits. An anomaly. A group that should never have existed, brought together by a quirkless boy and a god's desperate gamble. He thought of the name he had read about in analysis files, the one given to the next generation of Earth's mightiest heroes in other timelines, other stories. It felt right. It felt earned. Yeah, Izuku said, a tired but triumphant smile spreading across his face. He looked at each of them in turn, a leader finally looking at his whole team. We are. Welcome to the Young Avengers. The text message had been as mundane as it was world-altering. It arrived on a cheap, disposable burner phone Kate had procured, its contents stark and unnervingly casual. Heard you kids made a mess in Brooklyn. Need a place to lie low and break things without getting yelled at? SIRD Annex 7, Long Island City. Keycard under the potted fern. Don't tell Tony. HH? Billy had asked, peering over Kate's shoulder. Happy Hogan, Kate had replied with a wry smile. Head of security for Stark Industries. Looks perpetually stressed, sounds like he's from a 40s gangster movie. Clint introduced us once, Apparently, he has a soft spot for reckless kids with projectile weapons, and so, they had found their home. Stark Industries Research Development Annex 7 was not Stark Tower. It was a squat, 5-story block of concrete and smoked glass, a relic from an earlier era of Stark corporate expansion that had been slated for demolition before being forgotten. From the outside, it was unremarkable. Inside, it was a ghost of brilliant futures that never came to be. Dust motes danced in the beams of light slanting through the grimy atrium windows. The ground floor was a cavernous space filled with canvas-draped shapes, early model Stark drones, prototypes for arc reactor-powered coffee makers, a skeletal frame that looked suspiciously like a preliminary Iron Man boot. "Whoa!" Cassie whispered, her eyes wide as she poked a shrouded lump that hummed faintly. "It's like a museum of mad science. It's perfect." Izuku breathed, his analytical gaze sweeping the area. His mind was already cataloging the possibilities. Secure perimeter, independent power grid connected to a decommissioned arc reactor, reinforced walls. This is an ideal training environment. The others were less focused on tactical advantages and more on the sheer cool factor. Teddy had found a vintage Captain America pinball machine in a corner break room, its lights flickering weakly when he touched it. Billy was running a hand over a dormant holographic display table, feeling the thrum of latent technology. Kate was assessing the upper-level gantries and catwalks, her archer's mind instantly mapping out sightlines and vantage points. "Upstairs," Happy's note had added. "Use the big room. Try not to blow a hole in the tri-state area." The big room was on the top floor. It was a vast, hemispherical chamber with a domed ceiling and walls made of interlocking metallic plates. At its center was a raised circular platform. It was a combat simulator. A danger room, Stark style. "Okay. This is officially the coolest clubhouse ever," Cassie declared, doing a little spin on the platform. "This changes everything," Izuku said, his voice alight with a feverish intensity that made the others pause. He was already pulling out a fresh notebook, Hero Analysis for the Team, Volume 1, and a pen. "A controlled environment. We can run diagnostics, establish baseline power levels, practice combination maneuvers, develop protocols for different threat classes." Eli, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, crossed his arms. "Or we could just punch the robots until they stop moving. Worked pretty well in Brooklyn." "That was improvisation, not strategy," Izuku countered, his voice rising with passion. "We were lucky. Kong sent counters for Billy and Teddy. What happens next time when he has a counter for me? Or Kate? Luck runs out. We need a plan. We need to be a perfectly coordinated unit." A tense silence fell. Eli's words had been a gentle jab, but Izuku's reply was a full-blown doctrinal statement. It was the first, subtle tremor of a foundational crack in their new team. Kate stepped in, ever the pragmatist. "He's got a point, Deku. A plan is good. But we just saved a city block yesterday. Can we maybe order a pizza before we start writing a tactical manual?" Izuku looked at the eager, hopeful faces of his new team and felt a flush of embarrassment. He was getting ahead of himself. Again. "Right. Of course. Pizza. Food is a necessary component for maintaining peak operational readiness," Teddy chuckled. "Or it's just delicious. Come on, man. Let's go find that pinball machine." The rest of the day was a dream. They ate greasy pizza on the floor, laughing as Teddy tried to explain the convoluted history of the Kree-Skrull War using salt and pepper shakers. Cassie, shrinking down to 6 inches tall, explored the ventilation system and reported back on the building's layout. Billy used a small cantrip to get the pinball machine working, and he and Teddy took turns, their easy affection a warm, stable center for the group. Kate and Eli fell into a surprisingly intense competition, seeing who could bounce a rubber ball off the most surfaces and into a trash can from 50 feet away. Izuku watched them, his notebook open on his lap. But for once, he wasn't writing. He was just observing. He saw the way Kate's eyes tracked the ball's trajectory, her mind a natural supercomputer of physics and angles. He saw the effortless leadership in Eli's posture, the way he instinctively took charge of the silly game. He saw the boundless, joyful power in Cassie, the deep, complex well of magic in Billy, the quiet, unshakable strength in Teddy. They weren't just power sets. They were people. His people. A profound sense of belonging washed over him, and the Odin force within him hummed in quiet contentment. That night, however, the fear crept back in. As the others found makeshift bedrooms in old executive offices, Izuku sat alone in the dim light of the combat simulator. The faces of his friends flashed in his mind, followed by the cold, red optic of an Ultrox. Luck runs out. He couldn't protect them with luck. He had to protect them with preparation. He had been given this power, this responsibility. Failure wasn't an option. Their safety rested entirely on his shoulders. He was the leader. He had to have a plan. He opened his notebook. And under the humming silence of the dormant facility, he began to write. The next morning, Izuku gathered them in the simulator. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, but they burned with an almost manic energy. He had traded his Asgardian tunic for a simple green tank top and combat pants, a self-imposed training uniform. In his hands he held not one notebook, but a thick binder, its pages filled with his neat, cramped handwriting, color-coded tabs sticking out from the sides. "Good morning," he announced, his voice tight with purpose. "I've designed our first integrated training simulation. I'm calling it Protocol 7 Alpha." The team exchanged uneasy glances. The relaxed, joyful atmosphere of the previous day had evaporated, replaced by a drill sergeant's tension. "Protocol 7 Alpha?" Cassie asked hesitantly. "What happened to Protocols 1 through 6? Those were theoretical drafts I discarded," Izuku said, waving a dismissive hand. "Flawed. Inefficient. This is the optimized version." He tapped a console, and a holographic display shimmered to life above the platform. It was a complex flowchart, a dizzying web of arrows, boxes, and contingency plans. "Okay," he began, pointing to the diagram. "The simulation will generate 12 standard model attack drones. Phase 1, Kate, you will take up a sniper position on the simulated rooftop here." A glowing green box appeared on the schematic, and provides suppressing fire, targeting their primary optic sensors. "Your target priority is Delta, Gamma, and Zeta," Kate frowned. "You want me to call them by Greek letters? Why can't I just shoot the ones in front?" "Because my calculations show that neutralizing those specific drones first will create the optimal bottleneck in the plaza below," Izuku explained, his voice patient but strained. "It's about controlling the battlefield." He turned to the others. "While Kate establishes the bottleneck, Eli and Teddy, you will engage in a coordinated defensive perimeter. Eli, you'll use your shield to absorb incoming fire, prioritizing the protection of civilian assets. Teddy, you will use your mass to create physical barriers and draw aggro from the Alpha and Beta units. Your job is to contain, not destroy." Eli's jaw tightened. "So my job is to stand there and get shot at. Your job is to execute the plan," Izuku corrected, a sharp edge to his tone. "Cassie, you will remain at standard size until Phase 2. Billy, you will be on magical support, using minor shields and binding spells only. No large-scale reality warping until I give the signal for Phase 3, the decisive strike. At that point, we will all converge on my position and unleash a synchronized alpha strike. I have the exact timing calculated to the microsecond. Are there any questions?" There were a million questions. The air was thick with them. The plan was rigid, suffocating. It left no room for instinct, no room for the fluid reality of a fight. It treated them like chess pieces, like extensions of Izuku's own will. Kate spoke first. "Deku, this is a lot. Fights aren't like this. They're messy. Things change. That's why the plan is so detailed," he insisted, his knuckles white where he gripped the binder. "It accounts for variables. I ran the numbers all night. This is the most efficient path to victory with 0% risk of injury." Eli stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You ran the numbers. What about us? You've given us orders, not a strategy. A leader trusts his team to make their own calls. I do trust you." Izuku's voice cracked. "I trust you to follow the plan. The plan that keeps you safe." The chasm between them was widening with every word. Izuku saw their hesitation as a lack of discipline. They saw his rigidity as a lack of faith. Let's just try it, okay?" Billy said, trying to be the peacemaker. It's just a simulation. What's the worst that can happen? Izuku gave him a grateful look and turned to the console. Okay. Simulation Protocol 7 Alpha. Begin. The metal plates on the walls shimmered and dissolved into a holographic projection of a bustling city plaza. The sounds of traffic and conversation filled the air. Lifelike holographic civilians milled about. Then, from alleys and rooftops, 12 sleek, silver drones descended, their red optics glowing. Phase 1, engage! Izuku commanded. Kate sighed, but sprinted for the holographic fire escape, scrambling to the designated rooftop. She knocked an arrow. Targeting. Delta, I guess. She loosed an arrow that streaked across the plaza and shattered a drone's optic. Below, Teddy morphed into his hulkling form and slammed into the street, creating a crater to serve as a makeshift trench. Eli stood firm, shield raised, as the drones opened fire. Beams of red light spattered harmlessly against the vibranium alloy. For the first 30 seconds it worked. The drones were herded contained. Izuku watched from his command position, a flicker of triumphant relief on his face. See? It works. The plan works. And then the simulation introduced the unexpected element. A holographic school bus, its brakes squealing, swerved to avoid the battle and crashed into a storefront. From the bus, a new figure emerged, a small, crying holographic child, who then ran directly into the newly formed kill zone. A hostage. Izuku's brain screeched to a halt. A hostage was not in the plan. It was not in the flowchart. He had not calculated the variables for a civilian in the line of fire. His carefully constructed house of cards, built on a foundation of pure logic, began to tremble. New objective! Kate yelled from the rooftop. Protect the kid! Deku, what's the call? Izuku was frozen. His mind was racing, trying to recalculate everything. The angles, the risk factors, the potential for collateral damage. He needed more data. He needed to adjust the plan. It would take at least 30 seconds to devise a new, optimal strategy. He didn't have 30 seconds. His silence was an answer in itself. On the battlefield, it was an eternity. Eli made his own call. Forget the plan. Cassie, get the kid! He roared. Cassie, who had been itching for action, didn't hesitate. On it. She grew, not to her full stature size, but to a manageable 10 feet, and took a giant step toward the child. At the same time, Billy, seeing the immediate danger, disregarded his orders. He began chanting a powerful transportation spell, his hands glowing with blue light, intending to teleport the child to safety. Meanwhile, Kate, seeing 2 drones turning their weapons on the child, abandoned her sniper's perch. She drew a special arrow, a net arrow, and fired, trying to ensnare the drones before they could shoot. It was a catastrophic failure of teamwork. Cassie's giant arm, reaching for the child, swung directly into the path of Kate's net arrow. The net wrapped uselessly around Cassie's wrist. Eli, seeing Cassie was now exposed, broke his defensive line and charged forward, shield raised, to cover her. This left Teddy to take the full, concentrated fire of 5 drones at once. Teddy roared as the energy beam slammed into him, forcing him to a knee. And Billy's teleportation spell, disrupted by the sudden surge of chaotic energy, and his own divided focus, fizzled. The half-formed portal collapsed with a sickening pop. The holographic child, now surrounded by drones, looked up. A drone's weapon whined as it charged a final shot. The world went red. A blaring siren filled the room. Simulation failed. Objective civilian protection failed. Team cohesion, critical failure. The holograms vanished, leaving the 6 of them standing in the stark, silent metal room. The only sound was their own heavy breathing. The silence was an accusation. Cassie shrank down to normal size, her face pale. I blocked your shot, Kate. I'm so sorry. It wasn't your fault, Kate said, her voice tight with frustration. She wasn't looking at Cassie. She was looking at Izuku. It was the plan. It was too rigid. We needed to adapt. We needed to follow the plan. Izuku shot back, his voice thin and cracking. The failure was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. The holographic child's face was burned into his retinas. He had failed. He had gotten someone killed. It wasn't real, but it felt real. There was no plan for a hostage, Deku! Eli's voice was cold, sharp, and stripped of all its earlier respect. The moment things went sideways, you froze. You stood there calculating while people were in danger. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. The word hit Izuku like a physical blow. Cowardice. He flinched, his face crumbling. He wasn't a coward. He was being careful. He was trying to keep them safe. Wasn't he? I was assessing the situation. He stammered, his defense sounding weak even to his own ears. You were hiding in your own head. Eli retorted, his voice merciless. A real leader is on the field, in the moment. Not 50 feet away with a clipboard. My grandfather didn't have a flowchart when he charged into enemy lines. Captain America doesn't stop to run the numbers. They act. They trust their team. You don't trust us. You don't even trust yourself. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Izuku's confidence. Because they were true. He didn't trust himself. He trusted his notes. He trusted his analysis. He believed that if he could just create the perfect, unbreakable plan, he could abdicate the terrifying responsibility of making a choice in the moment. The power inside him, the vast ocean of the Odin force, felt a million miles away. It was a cold, distant sea, and he was shrinking on the shore. He couldn't meet their eyes. The disappointment on Billy and Teddy's faces, Cassie's deflated hope, Kate's frustrated pity, Eli's cold judgment. It was too much. He did the only thing he knew how to do when he was overwhelmed. He retreated. Without a word, he turned and walked off the training platform. He went to the corner of the vast room, where he'd left his bag. He pulled out Hero Analysis for the Team, Volume 1, and his pen. He sat down on the cold metal floor, his back to them, and began to write. Frantic, desperate scribbles filled the page. Failure of Protocol 7 Alpha. Root cause, insufficient contingency planning. Variable hostage unaccounted for. Solution, develop subprotocols for all foreseeable civilian in jeopardy scenarios. 7 Beta 1, hostage in open field. 7 Beta 2, hostage in confined space. 7 Beta 3, he wasn't analyzing anymore. He was spiraling. He was building a fortress of paper and ink to hide inside, a place where logic reigned and the messy, unpredictable emotions of his team, and himself, couldn't reach him. The others watched him, a silent, heartbreaking tableau. What is he doing? Cassie whispered to Kate. Kate sighed, a weary, frustrated sound. What he always does. He thinks if he can write the perfect answer, he won't have to face the question. She took a step toward him. Deku, he didn't look up. His pen just moved faster, scratching across the page. I'm working on a new protocol, he said, his voice flat and distant. It will be better. It will work. He was gone. The earnest, caring boy who had stitched them together was gone, replaced by this obsessive, frightened analyst. Eli just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He turned and walked out of the room without another word. Teddy put a comforting arm around Billy, and they followed, their quiet exit a verdict in itself. Cassie lingered for a moment, looking from Izuku's hunched form to the empty doorway, before she too drifted away, her usual ebullience completely gone. Kate was the last one left. She stood there for a long time, watching the boy who was supposed to be their leader bury himself in his notes. You know, Deku, she said softly, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. The problem isn't the plan. It's that you think a plan is the answer. He didn't respond. The only sound was the furious scratching of his pen. She sighed and turned away, leaving him alone in the vast, empty simulator. Izuku Midoriya sat in the center of his failure, surrounded by the ghosts of his own making. The golden power of the All-Fathers will felt cold and foreign in his veins, a borrowed weapon he had no idea how to wield. He was a leader who had lost his team. He was a hero who had succumbed to his own fear. And as he filled page after page with useless, intricate plans, he had never felt more like the quirkless, powerless Deku he had been his entire life. The rifts in the team weren't just forming, they were chasms, and he was the one digging them deeper with every stroke of his pen.